Welcome to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. As we look back on President Trump's first 100 days and the administration's actions we've covered on the show, tariffs, mass firings of federal workers, the immigration and free speech crackdowns, the attacks on universities, law firms, or the press, we want to know how all of this has affected you. Both critics and supporters of the president say they've felt this administration's presence in their daily lives in ways unlike any administration in recent memory. How about you? Tell us by calling 866-733-6786, posting on our social channels at KQED Forum, or by emailing forum@kqed.org. VJ writes that he thinks a better question would be how we live through 4 years of Biden's mismanagement. Elena writes, these 100 days are causing me lots of extreme anxiety. I've stopped listening to the news to reduce my anxiety. I'm very scared of what's going on. We need to speak up. And Noelle says, I went and bought a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey. Joining me this hour to help assess the president's performance and its impact on you are Michelle Singletary, personal finance columnist for The Washington Post, who writes the nationally syndicated column The Color of Money. Michelle, welcome to Forum.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us is Jocelyn Sze, psychologist and clinical professor at UC Berkeley. So glad to have you here with us, Jocelyn.
So glad to be here. Thanks so much.
And in studio is Marisa Lagos, politics correspondent and co-host of Political Breakdown for KQED. Hey, Marisa.
Hey, Mina.
So start us off, Marisa. You have been all over the state. You've talked to a lot of people. What would you say is the overall mood and assessment of the Trump administration's first 100 days among Californians?
Well, I think like a lot of things in politics, it really depends on what political perspective you're coming from. I think that, there is some anxiety across the board because of the sort of, whole cloth changes we've made to things like tariffs. I think there's some consternation even among some more conservative pockets around things like immigration raids, because there's a lot of uncertainty about how this is going to affect things like agriculture and other, business communities. But I think that broadly, probably the letter next to your voter registration is going to be a big factor in deciding how you feel about this president at this point. I think there's a lot of anxiety among folks who voted against Trump. The polling shows even among some independents who might have voted for him. And I think that is what we're seeing really, this is a very democratic state. So that it's not fair to say everybody feels in one way ever. But I think that anxiety, that concern is very pervasive, especially in the big cities like San Francisco and LA.
Especially, but I am also struck by the fact that you're saying you are hearing a little bit of that in rural areas or places, red counties that went for Trump.
I think that I should say a lot of my reporting so far has been focused on the policy areas because of the fact that there's just so much coming so quick. And a lot of what I intend to do in the next 100 days is sort of be on the ground more and gauge some of the impacts of a lot of the changes that have been made. But Mina, I do think that when I talk to folks, say, even in law enforcement, in sort of more traditional conservative sectors, I notice that even if they don't want to talk against the president, there is a lot of concern about what he's doing. And there's also concern that speaking out would sort of put a mark on them. And so to me, that is fascinating. One of the areas I've been covering a lot is this question of sanctuary cities and the state and the sort of tension between the federal government and their desire to essentially force, if you ask the locals, local police and sheriffs into helping them with immigration enforcement. We should say that's because there just aren't enough ICE officers and DHS officers to do the job that Trump wants. So they need help. And I think that, when you look at how that's playing out around the state, you do have some more conservative sheriffs and others saying, hey, we're not going to stand in the way. But even there, it's not as if we've seen, a wholesale sort of pushback on the state law, which does prevent a lot of handoffs. I think that is an area where I'm going to be watching closely because, a Riverside County and Amador County, their sheriff may have voted for Trump and like Trump, but they are still bound by the laws of this state. And so I think there's a lot of tension developing between the aggressiveness of how Trump is going about this, and especially the fact that many of the things that he's done are not things that Congress has authorized. So there's a lot of legal questions that are out there.
Well, this listener, Kelly from San Jose, writes, I retired a year ago, haven't yet started getting Social Security, but plan to within 2 years. I started Medicare in October, but with Trump's wrecking the government and economy, things are uncertain. His tariff and Doge debacle has caused my savings to drop significantly. Some have come back recently, but less than half. My portfolio is diversified, but is it helping? How incompetent must one be to break the bond market? I'm also worried about Social Security and Medicare being there now that I'll need them. Michelle, I'm guessing you have heard concerns like this, and it sounds like the finance questions have been coming to you nonstop these last few months.
Yeah, just about every day I get an email, or as I'm in church, I get tugged as I'm leaving service or going to service from people very worried about their retirement savings, worried about whether they should start Social Security early, which comes with some financial downside. The earlier you start, the less you get. And so people are not sure what to do. And this is the same with businesses. The uncertainty is causing people to make decisions that may not be in their best interest, and could cost them a lot of money long term.
And how would you characterize the level of worry that you're seeing, Michelle?
I haven't seen this level of worry since the Great Recession. People are they are so scared. That's one of the second most popular questions I get is, should I pull my money out of the bank, an FDIC insured
Wow.
institution? Should I have a lot of money at my house? That is very concerning to me, that people are so unsure about how this administration is following the rules of law, that they feel that their money, their cash is better in their home under the mattress than in a insured institution.
And do
That's
you just want to say quickly what you tell people who have that level of fear?
Well, first of all, I said, tell me where you live, because I got some people. No, I'm just kidding. I don't keep a stockpile of money in your house. It's just there's too much risk to loss, to being stolen. In California, need I say more about fires and floods? And then also the risk of losing earnings on that money. In a high yield savings account, you can get 4 to 5%. The bond market is kind of a little crazy, but nonetheless, you're still going to get more than keeping it at your house. So I tell them, please don't do that.
Jocelyn, in terms of your clients, have they been bringing up the president or this administration in your sessions with them?
I've been a therapist for 19 years, and there's only been 2 times where 100% of my client base has brought in a global event. One was March 2020, pandemic lockdown, and this year right now. So I would say across the board, it's coming up in terms of increased anxiety symptoms, depression, insomnia, across a lot of different walks of life.
And so is it just sort of general anxiety and the effects of that, or is it also direct impacts? Are people directly impacted by the president's actions?
It's a great question. I think I really am seeing these 2 buckets of threats. I'm involved with a nonprofit, the Bay Area Trauma Recovery Clinic, which we primarily serve a low-income population. And in that clinic, we're really seeing these survival threats, just threats to job security, to a feeling of safety if you're in a targeted group. Just feeling physically safe is increasing certain symptoms such as PTSD. And then also seeing this bucket of existential threats, kind of these bigger attacks to things like due process and basic constitutional rights are really creating a feeling of being quite unsettled in a lot of folks right now.
And what do you try to say? I know there's very specific advice that you give to people based on what it is they're experiencing, but in terms of just a generalized set of advice?
Yeah. I think first is just that recognition that you're not alone, right? That we're all in this big soup together. And I think number one, it's to not isolate. Right now, withdrawing is a really common and human response to distress, right? That urge to crawl under a rock and stay there until all the bad things go away. Therapists really talk about this thing called opposite action, where you're resisting the urge to withdraw or disappear into your phone right now and instead connect in little and big ways.
Let me go to caller Paul in San Francisco. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us. You're on.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me, as a lifelong San Franciscan, a Democrat, now I feel more enabled to actually be more of a moderate, and even sometimes conservative on certain issues. The University of California, Berkeley, recently, since Mr. Trump got elected, has inaugurated a course where people actually can discuss different opinions without being shouted down or actually have demonstrations against them. So maybe that's one good thing Mr. Trump has done. Maybe promote actually the idea that a college campus can actually be a place of exchange of ideas.
Well, Paul, thanks for sharing that. And I do think that students, I'm really curious because you are, Jocelyn, a professor at UC Berkeley. What do you hear from students? Do they express to you a greater sense of an ability to be able to speak more freely on campus?
I think it will depend on a few factors. So our international students are the ones that are expressing much more concern and worry. So if there's any concern about citizenship status, that's a very real concern that we as in the kind of teaching mentorship roles are hearing from the students. So I think it's student specific in terms of those fears around freedom of speech right now.
How about you, Marisa? What do you hear?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't really heard that point of view on campuses specifically. I think, it's not, this may be something that folks on the left and right can agree on, but that, campuses do tend to be more liberal, and that has been sort of a hallmark of both faculty, but also the student bodies. And so I think that mostly what I'm hearing is consternation about, their ability to speak out, about their ability to protest, about the way things have been handled. When you get into the sort of nuance of some of the debates over some of the Palestine protests and the way that the universities have handled that, I think there is more sort of layers to that conversation. But I really haven't heard that particular perspective from students themselves.
We're assessing President Trump's first 100 days in office and hearing how you've been affected. Tell us at 866-733-6786 at the email address forum@kqed.org or by posting on our social channels. We'll have more after the break. I'm Mina Kim. Welcome back to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. We're talking this hour about how Trump's first 100 days in office have affected you and getting your assessment of the president's performance. We're talking about it with Michelle Singletary, personal finance columnist for The Washington Post, Marisa Lagos, politics correspondent for KQED and co-host of Political Breakdown, and with Jocelyn Sze, psychologist and clinical professor at UC Berkeley. You can post on our social channels, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at KQED Forum. You can give us a call at 866-733-6786. You can email your comments and questions to forum@kqed.org. And ahead of the show, we got this voicemail from a listener in Florida.
Trump's first 100 days approximately has been a disaster for me. My work involves CO2 recovery and methane recovery and greenhouse gas management and sequestration. And everything he represents is 100% opposite of my work. Further, those that are building these plans or developing these projects, the investors, et cetera, have all essentially gone away or become very stuck. And I'm afraid it's going to be that way for the entire term that he's around.
Marisa, the president's approval ratings have dropped since he took office, I think to the point where even the president is saying he wants to investigate the pollsters. Pew has it around 40%. Which I think a Time Siena poll called historically low for this point in an administration. So what's driving these low ratings, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. He still has very high approval ratings among his base, but he is losing independents. He is slipping very significantly among younger voters. He has a very high disapproval rating from Democrats. No surprise there. But I do think when you sort of dig down into some of the crosstabs, it's really fascinating. I mean, even Fox News has him underwater on everything other than border security, which they pulled out separate from immigration. And so I do think that what sort of taken all together these polls really seem to show is that a lot of the concern is really breaking through about not just what Trump is doing, but the way he is doing it, right? We see these numbers, concerns about the tariffs and what it is doing to people's finances, and if there is a plan there. This is somebody who really campaigned on this idea of bringing down the cost of groceries and everyday things, and now you have like Amazon listing the tariff price next to, as part of the breakdown of a price of something. The cases like Camilo Abrego Garcia, the Maryland undocumented immigrant who was mistakenly sent to El Salvador, the news over the weekend about the young children who are citizens but were deported with their mothers back to places like Honduras. I mean, it does seem like a lot of these stories are really breaking through, and I think when you look at the numbers across the board on issues like foreign policy, the economy, taxes, it is not good news for this president. And I think it raises interesting questions about how he will sort of react, because I don't see a world in sight where, the tariffs are suddenly abandoned. It doesn't seem like his administration is really listening to public opinion or hearing the concerns people have about the way he is approaching this immigration stuff. And so I do think all of this taken with some of the protests we've seen, some of the pushback from Democratic members of Congress, the tours that folks like Bernie Sanders and AOC have been on, it does seem like there's sort of some signs of life of an opposition, which is taking a bit.
Well, I want to go deeper on both of those things, whether or not he's going to change, and signs of life, I guess, in the opposition, to use your words. But yeah, it is very interesting. We had Nick Miroff on with regard to immigration, and he was basically saying that he felt like, yes, people were supportive of greater border security, but when you started deporting people who mistakenly or with legal status, then that was going to probably show up in terms of dissatisfaction among your voters.
And the border looks very secure. So I think people are a little bit maybe confused about why then this aggressive, sort of deportation effort is playing out the way it is, right? I think there's a lot of support for deporting folks who have been convicted of crimes and things like that. Not so much for families and other folks who we've seen.
And while immigration has been a strongest issue, it has not been incredibly high. I think the latest Washington Post poll was basically saying that it was at like 46%, and that there were more people disapproving of the way that he was carrying out his immigration policy, which makes me wonder, Michelle, if the general economic mood has actually been driving down some of his other numbers too. I guess, Michelle, the argument the administration is making in terms of short-term pain for long-term gain, or the ideal of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. is not resonating with the people that you're hearing from?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, individuals are looking at their micro situation, not the macro, as they should. And many economists are saying this idea that we're going to bring back all these manufacturing jobs the way the president has laid out is just not going to happen. And one of the reasons that's going to happen is because he flip-flops so much. He changes as much as he might change his underwear. And as a result, people don't know what to do. If I were a business, I'm not going to invest in a new building or manufacturing if I don't know what's going to be the policy tomorrow. And how does that relate to individuals? Well, individuals work for small businesses. And so if a small business says, you know what, I've got a little bit more customers, I'd like to hire another person, but I don't want to hire a person who then I didn't have to fire. They're concerned about the people that they employ, and they don't want to do that and be that position. And now we're finding out that all the cuts to the federal government, guess what? That impacts other people too. Contractors, the businesses that serve the contractors, nonprofits, and so all of us are tied together. And I think the way we vote, we sometimes don't think that way, that this is, sort of like my issue. But now we're saying, well, wait a minute. I know he was going to deport them people, but I didn't know he was going to deport the person that cleans my house or does my lawn or washes the dishes at my favorite restaurant. And so now we're realizing how interconnected we are, and the inhumanity of the decisions is what is causing all this angst. We all agree we want a smaller government. We want the federal budget balance. We want to make sure that Social Security is secure, but we also want to be careful about how we go about that so we don't further damage people's lives. And I think that's where we all are united. And that's what's showing up in the polls, that people are saying, hold up, wait a minute. this is not smart, and it's impacting my retirement account. And if it impacts my retirement account, even if you are not invested in the market, if people are pulling back and not shopping and not going on vacation and not doing things, that's going to impact your business if you sell souvenirs at the shop next to the bus station or in the city.
I'm so curious, Michelle, what do you tell people with regard to tariffs, just because that's been one of the things that has polled so poorly, or the trade war, about the degree to which they should let the uncertainty around the trade war affect their decision making?
So I've tried to put it in different buckets. If you were going to make a major purchase, a car, and you were already in the market, you had the money, you knew that you could afford it, go ahead and do it at like yesterday, because the studies are showing that any cars are going to go up as much as $10,000 to $20,000. It's like for the average family, that's crazy. So go ahead and pull that. However, don't jump and buy a car that you're not ready for, just so that you could save that $10,000. That makes no sense. So you don't need to buy that. Hold on to that hoopty that you have, that clunker. Get it fixed, because $1,500 car repair is a lot less than a $40,000 new car. And don't stockpile toilet paper and and paper towels. You can't pay your rent with toilet paper. So it may cost you a little bit more down the road, but you need to make sure you're stockpiling cash, not goods.
Michelle was talking about, Jocelyn, just the recognition that there's a certain inhumanity right now that's happening with the deportations. I'm wondering if you could just help me understand the psychological effect of living in sort of this level of constant fear, whether low level or not.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about just the aggression and the speed, and as Michelle said, the flip-flopping, for me as a psychologist, when I look at this, it really feels like the administration honestly just kind of pulled a page straight out of the playbook for narcissistic abuse. That is a form of emotional control that uses tactics like manufacturing what's called volatile uncertainty. So that's uncertainty that's not just that future outcomes are unknown, but they are also unpredictable and constantly changing. What that does to a person, or in this case, a people, is that it amplifies anxiety by overwhelming the brain's ability to prepare and anticipate. The volatile uncertainty that so many of us are experiencing and talking about is tremendously dysregulating to our nervous systems. And it is really paramount, I think, that we start to recognize that collectively with each other and figure out how to build resilience. That the good news about the playbook is it's a playbook. It's actually very predictable. It's very consistent. And so we can get out of reactivity mode and move more into proactive unity, as so many people have been
Can I ask something?
describing.
Sure, I'm
of
just
course.
curious then how you talk to your patients and folks who are expressing this type of anxiety about staying engaged versus checking out, right?
Yes.
Because it's such, and obviously in our jobs, Mina and I don't have a choice, but, I've also found myself putting guardrails on some of just like the time that I spend like engaging in the news. And it's, it's not just the U.S. news. The news can be very upsetting, but it's like you also don't want to tell people, okay, just like step back and don't be involved civically, right?
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, those guardrails are essential right now. We call those in therapy world boundaries, right? Boundaries are something that everyone needs to be exercising right now as much as they can. But I also educate my clients just on what is nervous system dysregulation. It really falls into these 5 modes. We know about fight and flight, but we also will see freeze response, that inaction and paralysis. And we'll see fawn, that's things like complying or preemptive obedience. And then there's flop, which is giving up in hopelessness and despair. And so just being able to name that these are really normal human responses to the chaos that a lot of people are experiencing right now, and sharing with others about what you're experiencing in your bodies and in your brains right now. And then taking that breath and coming together on, okay, if we don't want to just stay stuck in those survival modes, what next? And so I think it is that combination of absolutely keep setting those guardrails. I'm telling 100% of my clients to start storing their phones, charging their phones outside of their bedroom at night. Just incredible amounts of sleep disruption and folks checking the news at 3 a.m., 5 a.m. And so those guardrails are essential. But then the action is one of the best things for your mental health right now, coming together in collective action.
I don't know if I could ever not charge my phone right next to my bed, but I can totally see how that would be really, really helpful. We're talking with you listeners about how the first 100 days of Trump's administration are affecting you, how they've affected you maybe on the financial level, but also on the psychological level as well. Polls are suggesting that a lot of people are not very happy with the way it has affected them, as we've seen poll numbers sink as we close in on these first 100 days. Let me go to caller Jennifer in San Francisco. Hi, Jennifer, you're on.
Good morning. This subject, I'd like for everybody, for me, is so personal. In particular, Medicare and Medicaid. It sends chills down my spine. I have a dear friend who relies on Medicaid for her very existence. I have a mother who has part of Medicare, and we are sitting here holding our breath, or rather trying not to hold our breath, and wondering what we should and should not do. Mind you, I have a whole team around me that is helping, but Jesus, what about the people who don't? What about the people who are just alone in their house apartments going, what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do?
Jennifer, you are underscoring, I think, what you said earlier, Marisa, about when you go around the state, one of the things you really do hear about is concerns about Medicaid and the kind of funding that it's being given by the federal government or lack thereof.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a very real possibility. And unlike a lot of the things that the president has done, it does look like he's trying to go through Congress for this. And so if they succeed in cutting, $800 million or billion from Medicaid, billions. It will, very much affect a state like California, which has such a huge number of folks on that. On the other hand, this is also an area where folks do have some agency. We saw someone like David Valadao, Republican from a very purple district in the Central Valley, vote against the Medicaid cuts. And I think that is, someplace where there is a lot of sort of consternation among Republicans in Congress, especially in these swing districts, about whether that's something they want to do. I think some of that, those are easy things to focus on. I think, the other concern I hear is what is happening to Social Security? Yeah. Are these cuts and changes at the agency a pretext to sort of pave the way for privatization? And I think, again, that's a place where folks can be, proactive in terms of talking to their members of Congress, the senators that represent them, really sort of underscoring how important these things are. But yeah, these are people's lives. This is their health care. And we know from the last 20 years what a potent issue that is. And I think it's really going to be an interesting political question for a lot of these Republicans.
Yeah. And in answer to your question, it's more than $800 billion.
Yes,
with a B.
yes.
Let me go to Gisette.
Cut $1 trillion, and that is most of it.
Whew. Let me go to Gisette in Half Moon Bay. Hi, Gisette. You're on.
Thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I was going to say one way in which the funding cuts have really impacted my life is that I have a daughter who's about to graduate this June in bioengineering and was hoping to pursue a career in science. And graduate programs are all but canceled because so many grants have lost funding, and there's so much uncertainty about being able to accept students that there's a lot of young people that have interest in pursuing careers in science that are now looking at going abroad.
Yeah, well, Gisette, definitely research funding cuts. Students are feeling those. And then graduating students are also, Michelle, feeling the concerns around the fact that they are now on the hook to pay back their student loans at the very beginning of this year after a 5-year pause of not penalizing borrowers. That has started. What are you telling student loan borrowers, Michelle?
So the first call you have to make is to your lender. or lenders, if you've got federal and private loans, and talk to them about your options. We're not sure where the income-based payment plans are going to end. The SAVE program, which I thought was a great way to help people, particularly if you had a payment that didn't cover all your interest, the interest would go away. And I know a lot of people are like, well, where's it going? But the fact that matters, it did help a lot of people who just couldn't afford those payments. And so if I were having student loans graduating, I'm thinking I got to pay this. If you can, go back home and live with your parents, find a relative, a friend. If you've got 5 roommates, you're going to keep 5 roommates to get that debt off your books. So turning to some sort of debt forgiveness that was there as because of it started with the pandemic and then it followed it afterwards. It's just not going to be there. It's a different landscape. So don't look for help from the federal government. And that means that you got to figure out how to incorporate that student loan payment into your budget.
Critics of the Trump administration, as well as supporters of the Trump administration, are describing these first 100 days as having touched a corner of their life in a way that no previous administration, at least in recent memory, has for a long time. And you, our listeners, are telling us how at 866-733-6786, at the email address forum@kqed.org, on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. You're doing it with Jocelyn Sze, a psychologist at UC Berkeley, Michelle Singletary, a personal finance columnist for The Washington Post. The Color of Money is her column. Marisa Lagos, politics correspondent for KQED. This listener on Discord writes, I'm trans and rushed to get an updated passport before Trump took office. Who knows if that's even good at this point? I was hoping to travel to my sister's wedding later in the year across the country, but that seems less and less safe. I'm also worried about my access to gender-affirming care. I'm really starting to feel like my life was on track, and this has really unsettled that. More after the break. I'm Mina Kim. You're listening to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. We are assessing Trump's first 100 days in office and how it has affected you, our listeners. We're talking with Marisa Lagos of KQED, Michelle Singletary of The Washington Post, who does a personal finance column, The Color of Money there, and with psychologist and clinical professor at UC Berkeley, Jocelyn Sze. You, our listeners, are sharing how Trump's first 100 days have affected your daily life, your community, your finances, the direct impacts that you have faced. And listener Noel writes, I try to boost my sister-in-law's morale as she fears for her job at the VA. At least she's been going to protests, so that helps with her anxiety. I even applied for a job at the Palo Alto VA, despite all the uncertainty. Jocelyn, didn't you work at the VA at some point? Are you in touch with your colleagues?
I am in touch with my colleagues, and gosh, they really are on the front line right now. And there's just a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress due to the ongoing week-to-week changes in bureaucracy and policies.
In terms of just what to do after a job loss like this, in a lot of cases very sudden, or just that constant concern that you are going to lose your job, especially if you have a federal role, what are you hearing from clients and what are you trying to tell them?
Gosh, I mean, I think first it's just devastating. I think below all the anxiety, there's just so much grief. I think the grief is a little bit even harder for us to make space for. You know, this is a fast-paced experience for everyone, and grief requires slowing down. So I think just naming that there are just tremendous levels of loss happening within the VA system and a million other systems right now. And sometimes, you know, just being able to share those stories and name that together, at least it can take that second level of anxiety off if we can just sit with the real feelings underneath.
Let me go to caller Adam in San Francisco next. Hi, Adam, you're on.
Good morning. I'd like to speak about Social Security. For decades, the Republican Party have been trying to steal. The fact is, Social Security owned and paid by the American people. From the first day they go to work to the day they retire or die. Employer like myself owned big company for decades, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars Social Security money in the fund. It is really sad. These are a bunch of robbers and thieves trying to steal the country. The other point, very important point, the word thematic belongs to a group of language. Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and a few others. It has nothing to do with race, religion, whatever. Johns Hopkins University made a DNA study on Palestinians and Israelis. Israelis came 2% DNA from Old Hebrew. Palestinians came 78%. We need education. We need to educate people because what's happening now, one of the darkest history in not only America, in the whole world. These are very dangerous group of people who have taken over. Thank you very much.
Adam, I hear your concern. Let me go next to Patricia in Los Altos. Hi, Patricia, you're on.
Hi. I was really surprised at the earlier comments about students at universities potentially feeling more free to discuss things because of all the rhetoric that's going on. That's not what I've seen or experienced. I just imagine a parent, particularly the international students who saved their whole life to send their kids to a top university, only to find out that their student visa was revoked, or worse yet, they were picked up and detained in some detention center, also known as a prisoner. I don't think international students are opening their mouth to peep, and I think other students are concerned also, because if you can do this to a student who isn't a citizen, who should be protected by the Constitution, you can do it to a student who is a citizen. You know, it starts with one and it becomes worse. So I think people are scared to death. I see people in my daily life that are in the middle. I have a friend that's in the middle of the process of gaining her citizenship, but she's not there yet, and she is scared to death. She won't take the bus to work, and she won't open the door at her house. You know, people are afraid all over the country.
They are, Patricia. This listener writes, after the first 100 days, I find myself untrusting of strangers around me. We are planning a road trip towards the Sierras in a month, and I'm apprehensive of driving through some of the communities. I mean, for me, it is a fact that these places may be brimming with hate. You know, Marisa, you mentioned this before, and I want to address it in terms of if you think there will be any adjustments, maybe not from Trump himself, because yes, he does seem, like he wants to follow a particular track and likes to double down even when things look like they're not going in the direction. But from other people with sway in the administration as well, like, do you see the assessment at this stage in his presidency having any effect in terms of pivoting, changing course at all, or just making some adjustments?
Not yet, but this is a president who is not immune to public opinion, right? He does care about the markets. He cares about public opinion polls. I think that the difference between this administration and the last one is just the fact of who he surrounded himself with. I mean, these are very sort of hardliner folks. I'm thinking about on the immigration front, you have Tom Homan, his czar, you have Kristi Noem, Department of Homeland Security. They are all in on the sort of not just the policy, but the way that Trump wants to carry it out. So do I think something is going to change overnight? I don't. But I do think that, the public pressure will matter. And I think that a lot of these numbers will matter. I also want to acknowledge when we talk about his base, supporting him, it's over 80% approval. There are a lot of people, and I know my colleague Izzy Bloom, our colleague Mina, has been talking to a lot of Trump voters, and a lot of them are still very pleased with what he's doing. They feel that he is carrying out the promises he made. They feel that, the border crossings have dropped close to zero. That is, to them, very paramount to what he campaigned on. And I do think that, if you are not dependent on these safety net programs, if you are not running a business, there are a lot of people sort of more in the middle who maybe have not been personally affected by what is happening. And so, we're hearing obviously from, folks who are, going to a Bay Area university and expressing concern. But I do think there are a lot of people out there who are very pleased with the way he's going about this. And I think that, back to your original question, like, the pressure that we're seeing and the decline among some of the voters who were independents, who Republicans were able to bring over, I think it's going to sort of take a little bit more time, and as we approach the midterms, perhaps we'll see more adjustments from this White House, but maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lag time still for some of the policies that they've put in place, too, to feel their full effects as well.
And a lot of the things that they've done are just being held up in court. And so that is where you don't really know the outcome of these threats to not just Medicaid funding, but, all law enforcement funding for California because of sanctuary policies. Again, those are some of the stories I'm trying to get out there and understand better, because part of the problem here with covering this administration is a lot of what they've been doing it's not clear. Like, they made threats and then they were stalled by a court, but then in some cases they followed through on those threats. We had that caller earlier about a graduate, a mother of a graduate student or soon to be graduate student. This is something I'm hearing from folks in San Francisco whose kids are applying to college right now. They just don't have any idea whether the FAFSA application, the student loan application, will even be processed, if there will be that availability, what things will look like on college campuses who are standing to lose millions or billions of dollars in research and other funds that help sort of support the overall infrastructure. And so I think uncertainty is really a big thing right now, regardless of your political,
exactly
stripe.
You brought up the midterms, too. What I find interesting is in some of these polls, Democrats aren't doing very well either. And I'm wondering is this just a lot of Democrats who are very critical of the people in their party not showing enough resistance to this particular administration? Or is it just that, they really haven't been able to find footing, even with the fact that it seems that this president's activities are not broadly popular?
I think both. I mean, Trump was able to really sweep the battleground states by bringing over a lot of groups of voters that historically have supported Democrats, independents, young people, even voters of color. And so I think that, Democrats need to make an actual case here. We've seen, I think, signs of life, as I said before, but really, we are only 100 days in. I think those cases are beginning to sort of be developed. And I think, the question is going to be who the Democratic Party does not have a natural leader right now. And that makes it really hard, because every time Trump steps in front of a camera or microphone, it becomes a global story. There's no one who really has that power at this moment in the opposition. And so, developing that, figuring out who are going to be the leaders, I think is going to be a really big political question. But I do think we're seeing, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, has been getting a lot of attention for his really fiery sort of rhetoric. Yeah. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have attracted tens of thousands of people, even in, purple and red areas of places like California, to these rallies. And so I think that there's a burgeoning movement, but again, we're 3 months in, and the election for the midterms will not be until fall of 26.
And though, as you're right that Trump's approval is very much based on what party affiliation, you have one thing that you have also seen across the board as being very unpopular is defying court orders. Mm-hmm. And that is something that survey respondents have been very clear on, that they think is a level of lawlessness that at least this stage across party, they're not willing to tolerate.
And I do think your level, especially if you're a Republican who supported Trump, perhaps your level of approval for the president is also directly related to how engaged you are, because I think a lot of the sort of details of some of, the response to court orders, the way they have proceeded with these immigration deportations, I think the more you dig in, the more troubling it is to some people.
Let me go to caller Lynn in Pleasant Hill. Hi, Lynn. You're on.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. Like others who have shared, I've been really hurt in the stock market just because after 27 years of work and saving as a social worker, I've already lost $100,000. And I just retired, so I'm the one who's going to be hurt so much. But beyond other things that people have said, I feel like in these 100 days, my values are assaulted every day by this administration. This administration focuses on what we can give the rich and take it from the poor. Medicaid is a program for the poor, and that's their plan, to give this money to wealthy people. I feel like as they talk Christianity, of which I love and follow, I feel like they're interested in Christian jewelry. Make sure you wear your cross, but don't live out Christian values.
Thanks.
now, Besant saying something like, this is strategic uncertainty. The only people that's good for are people who are insider traders. Oh, and what that really means is insider cheaters.
Lynn, thanks for calling. And let me remind listeners, you are listening to Forum. I'm Mina Kim. Michelle, I feel for Lynn just listening to the state that she's at in her life and the losses she's experiencing. I mean, are these market swings, are they at least starting to stop?
They're not stopping. They slowed a little bit. And I think when the bond market kind of took a hit, they were like, wait a minute, because that talks about how secure people feel in the U.S. government. I mean, bonds, treasuries is like they've never defaulted. But if that is impacted, hold on, wait a minute. And I would say if people's listening and looking at the portfolio, unless you're going to pull out all that money, you don't lock in those losses until you do pull out that money. But that's just an academic phrase when I say that, because people are like, look, I'm looking at this return and it's down $100,000 and I'm not happy about that. And all I can say is feel what you need to feel. I think it's very important in this discussion that we talk about people getting mental health help to deal with this. And even especially as investors, I've been talking to my counsel, like, how do I stay calm as I'm trying to help other people? And these are real feelings. This is real money, at least on paper, until you pull it out. And I'm hoping that at some point, someone in the administration will see that this does not help long term, because if people pull out, we know that a lot of them won't get back in. And the biggest threat to your financial future is inflation. So that means your money needs to grow, and it's not going to grow in the mattress, and it's not going to grow in a low yield bank account to the point at which you're going to need that money in retirement to pay for health care and the other things that you need as you age.
Steve on Discord writes, I have a smallish investment, about $40,000 to $50,000 that I inherited from my mother. It lost about 15% of the value in the first half of April, presumably fallout from the tariffs. At that rate, it'll be essentially valueless after 3 more years. David on Discord writes, Trump's Liberation Day liberated me from my 401k. Chris writes, I have 3 grandkids looking at college, 2 clearly on the academic track. We are carefully looking at universities abroad, wondering if they'd be able to get back into the U.S. if they go. We're hearing about how the first 100 days of the Trump administration have affected you, your finances, your state of mind. Let me go to caller Chris next in San Francisco. Hi, Chris. You're on.
Hey, thank you so much for dealing with this. I am also a psychologist, and what I have been doing for myself and for other women that live in this professionally is recommending don't join people alone.
Recommending what? I'm sorry, Chris?
Find a support group. Find a community.
Find a community. I'm so sorry. I think the line is just a little bit unclear, but I get your point, Chris, and actually underscores your point, Jocelyn, earlier about don't isolate in this time. Like, even if you fear certain things, you can find people who totally trust.
100%.
Be with them, even if.
Absolutely. I mean, in all this, I joined a woman, non-binary, trans taekwondo school that is volunteer run. And what we do together is we just practice staying grounded and feeling physically safe in our bodies when we are literally under direct physical attack, because we spar each other. And to me, I agree with this caller that it is tremendously co-regulating to find your spaces where you can just feel safe and strong.
Yeah.
In yourself.
We're coming up on the end of the hour, but would that be your key recommendation in terms of how to approach the next few months?
And you'll be amazed what's out there. I think if you start seeking it out right now, you're gonna find what you need.
Michelle, give me one step of sort of financial resilience for the uncertainty that appears to be continuing, at least for the next few months.
I think acknowledge your fear, but don't act on that fear right away when it comes to your financial decisions. Really think through it with the help of professionals so that you make the best decision for yourself long term. These are short term things happening right now. And I really am worried about people making short term decisions that could cost them a lot of money down the road.
Yeah. Marisa, I know we don't usually talk shop, but, one of the things that we constantly talk about here is making sure that we're putting our own boundaries on how much we cover and what we feel like our listeners need to know versus covering everything that may not end up going anywhere and just causing a lot of stress and fear for people. But how have you put boundaries on trying to determine for listeners, what they should listen to and what you should focus your own reporting on?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the beat I have developed this year is really this sort of Trump versus California, because that's how a lot of the politics and policy have played out. And then, I co-host Political Breakdown, which I think, like Forum, I really see as an opportunity to give people context and to be a place where if you listen to our show 3 times a week, hopefully you have a pretty good sense of what's happening in your state and nation, and you don't have to be like mainlining news 24/7. And then, for me, like I said, I think I really try to think about what matters to folks and what is going to impact their lives directly.
Thank you, listeners, for sharing what matters to you. And thank you, Marisa, Michelle, and Jocelyn, and Tessa Paoli for producing this segment. This is Forum. I'm Mina Kim.